Welcome to Hochoka Podcast.
Some tout the elegance of simplicity, and nowadays it seems everyone is talking about Ikigai, the Japanese word-become-buzzword for purpose. It is said to be the secret to a long and happy life. But it's been more than a decade since Joseph Marshall III drew on centuries-old Lakota wisdom to write about simplicity and purpose as characteristics of a life well lived. Hello, Mitaki Api, and welcome to Hochoka, here at the center of St. Joseph's Indian School's campus. I'm Scott Wooster, today's Hochoka host. Joseph Marshall III is a frequent Hochoka guest. Today we continue the conversation begun earlier on lessons in resilience from the bow and arrow. Joseph, always wonderful to have you here.
Great to be here again.
We're going to go with parts 2 and 3. First part we talked about transformation.
Right.
Let's go with simplicity and purpose this time.
Okay.
And we'll just start with simplicity. And
sure.
Can you share a story about simplicity?
Sure. One of the stories that I liked as a child and heard a couple of times was a story of a scout, a warrior scout. And scouts were a different class of warrior. They were the kind who went, scouting into sometimes enemy territory to see what the other people were doing. And they cultivated the art of stalking and hiding, and they became very good, some of them. So they were different kind of warrior. And there was one whose name was Brings the Lance. Wahukizeki Agali is the Lakota way of saying it, brings the lance. Mm-hmm. And he earned that name because he went into the village of a group of enemies and stole their ceremonial lance and brought it home. Mm-hmm. So that's where he earned the name.
Nice.
And he was good at what he did. Mm-hmm. So good that other young warriors came to want to learn from him. And one day, a young man came and wanted to learn and asked Bring the Lance, who was a formidable man, a very imposing-looking man, said, "Where did you learn to be such a great scout?" Because being that level of a scout meant he had to have a lot of not only physical skill, but a lot of courage and so forth. And Brings the Lance said to the young man, "I learned it from my grandmother," which, of course, was not the answer the young warrior was expecting to hear.
Yeah.
And he wondered why. And so the Bring the Lance explained to him that he was essentially a grandma's boy. He grew up, being with his grandmother. And because of that, he learned a lot. And he learned because of one experience where he and his grandmother were stranded on the other side of a river after a flood. And even though they didn't have much with them, his grandmother drew on her extensive knowledge and experience for them to survive for 3-4 days away from everybody else. She knew how to build a fire. She knew how to build a shelter real quickly. Mm-hmm. She knew how to make sure they were comfortable and pick berries and so forth. So they were okay. The boy was worried that, away from the village, they would be in danger of animals and so forth. But it didn't turn out that way, just because of what his grandmother knew. Mm-hmm. So as he grew up, then he knew that those simple things are the best way to probably be a good person and to live life. And out of that, there was a lesson he learned that in order to be a good scout, the less you carry with you, the faster you can move, the better you can hide and be a good scout. And that sort of, translates into what we can be in life or should be in life too. Simplicity is okay. Mm-hmm. We don't need to have a big burden. We don't need to be complicated. We need to be as simple as possible in order to get by. Mm-hmm.
And to take it a step further, and this is your thought, not mine, but I really like this. That's a way to live and a way to consider your belongings or the things you might have, but it's also a metaphysical kind of way of thinking too. Sure. So and this I'll attribute to you, but the more you know in your mind, the less you carry in your hand, the faster you can move. And is there a way that the bow and arrow, again, with you, a lot of this was imparted through the bow and arrow. How does the bow and arrow teach that lesson?
Well, a bow, even though it is very powerful in what it can do, it can send an arrow downrange a long ways, 150, 200 yards sometimes. What it weighs in your hand is next to nothing. It's not even maybe a pound in actual weight.
Right.
And the arrow is the same. Arrow is even less than that. Because it's thin and it's made out of certain kinds of wood. So when you have that kind of a physical weight, you could, that's next to nothing. You can move fast, and that's what Brings the Lance was trying to tell the young man. The more you know, it's not necessary to carry everything in your hand, because what you know is in your head and in your heart, and you don't need anything else. And conversely, if you know how to make a bow and arrow, the bow is always with you, whether you have one in your hand or not. And there are stories of people being stranded or losing their weapons in the old days, and because they knew how to make them, they just took the time to find the materials and make what they needed. So knowledge doesn't weigh anything.
Right.
So you can take it with you wherever you go.
Life can be very complicated, but that doesn't mean that we have to approach it in complicated ways.
No.
How did your grandfather, what story did he tell you to drive that point home to you?
Well, he told me a lot of stories, but there were times when he seemed to be able to sort of condense and simplify a lesson. And I remember once where he was talking about life, and he cleared a space on the ground and drew a circle in the dirt. It wasn't a very large circle, maybe 2 feet across. And he said, "That's life. It starts at a certain point and ends at a certain point, and it goes through the 4 stages of life. We're children, we're adults, we're old age, and then we finish our journey. And that's in a circle. That's what circle tells me." And then he drew 2 lines in across intersect the circle, and he said, "These are the 2 roads of life. These are the 2 choices." One he called the red road, and one he called the black road. The red road was the hard road. The black road was the easy road. The easy road is where you do the things that are easy. You don't gain anything by that. You make choices that are easy for you to do, but you don't learn anything, you don't develop character, you don't gain anything by making the easy choice. Whereas on the red road or the hard road, you develop experience, you develop character, because adversity helps you to be strong. And he said, one road is good, one road is bad. But what struck me later on was that he didn't say you have to follow the red road or you have to follow the black road. He said the choice is yours. You make the choice.
Yeah.
Whatever choice you make is how you will come out at the end.
Right.
If you rely on the easy way, then you're not going to learn anything. You're not going to gain any experience. You're not going to develop character. But the simplest lesson that he imparted from that is, whatever you decide, there will always be consequences. You can say what you want, you can do what you want, you can think what you want, but there will be consequences to all of those things later on. So just using that simple symbol of the circle, essentially the medicine wheel, which is a sacred symbol to us, he explained essentially just in a few words what life is all about.
Yeah. Absolutely. And the red road they're both transformative, but the red road is character building, transformative way I would think of it. Let's take a shift and go from simplicity to purpose now.
Okay.
There's a lot that's been written about, and again, we go back to buzzwords and we talk about the purpose-driven life, or the Japanese philosophy of Ikigai, right? Or the French saying raison d'être, right? But in your writing about it, you said it in the context of the bow, and it's as old as time, right? With the Lakota people, it's as old as the land that we have, that we're in right now, that we have the honor to be in. You talk about the bow, the arrow, a wedding ceremony, and it takes on an added depth and beauty, I think. Can you explain that story?
Yeah. A bow is a very beautiful thing to look at, to me anyway. It's a bent stick on a string, and to me it resembles the new moon, especially when you draw it back. And it takes a lot of skill and a lot of time to fashion a stave into that, what I call a work of art, but also a very powerful thing. And we use it to hunt, to get food for our family. We use it against our enemies to defend our families. So it serves a very, necessary purpose in that it has two personas, the defender and the provider. And the arrow, it needs to be as straight as possible. And in the same way, it takes a lot of skill to make that arrow, because there are more components to the arrow. There are more parts to the arrow than you are even to the bow.
Okay.
Yeah, there's the point, and there are the 2 or 3 feathers, and the sinew wrap that goes around. So there are more parts to an arrow than a bow. But the one thing that we don't always think about, without the arrow, the bow is useless. It can be as beautiful and as powerful as we want to make it, but unless it has an arrow, it is not serving its purpose. Conversely, the arrow can be as straight can be. It can be as beautiful as you want to make it, but without the bow, it cannot fulfill its purpose. So to me, that what defines the concept of purpose. We have to have a reason. We have to have a purpose, and sometimes we have to be part of something else in order to achieve our purpose. So in when a young couple were married, and the community agreed that they could be married, and the families agreed, then someone, usually an old person, will talk about the bow and the arrow. That without one, the others doesn't have a purpose.
Right.
Together, it's a whole different story.
Absolutely.
Together, they're one whole.
Yeah. And that's a perfect metaphor for marriage. If you were to talk about your purpose in life, I'm sure you've reflected on that from time to time. What's if you're the bow, what's the arrow, or vice versa, or how does that work?
I think that, I learned to like stories early on, just by listening to them and hearing stories from all sorts of people. And all those people were elders, or certainly were older than I was at the time. And they were all really exquisite storytellers. Each of them had a way of telling stories that really put you in the moment. And that was my entertainment as a young child. That was the way I learned about not only those people who were telling stories, but life, as it were. And I grew up admiring those people. They were my grandparents, or my grandparents' relatives, and other people who had, been part of my early life. I admired them. I respected them, and I wanted to be like them. And I learned a lot of stories listening in that context. So when I was probably in junior high, I wondered if I could be the same. And I didn't know how to go about it. I just had that, intent. The intent was there. And when I was in junior high, I found 2 books. One was a novel called The Iron Mistress.
Okay.
It was about Jim Bowie, a character named Jim Bowie, who was a real man. He fought and died at the Alamo, but he allegedly found a meteorite, and from that meteorite, he had a knife made called the Bowie knife.
Yeah.
So that story was about his life. But it was really well written.
Yeah.
And then at a rummage sale, I found a book called My People, the Sioux by Luther Standing Bear.
Mm-hmm.
And so I read them both and over and over and over again. And I realized this was a way of telling stories. And when I looked around in high school, the elders who were telling the stories were mostly gone. And they were dying off, and there were not many others who were picking up that that ability. And I knew that probably the only other way to do that was to write. Mm-hmm. So I think that's at the point in high school where I thought maybe learning how to tell stories in that format would be a good thing.
Right.
I just didn't know how to go about it, how it would happen. As it turned out, I did go on to school, and I did major in English, which was a good thing for me to learn how to write, the mechanism of writing. And so that kept leading me closer and closer to what I thought my purpose in life would be. Mm-hmm. I knew I would never be as good a storyteller as all those old folks were, but I had to be as good as I could be in order, because the stories are the important things.
Yeah.
Not me, but the stories.
Yeah.
The stories had to go on.
Right, yeah.
So that's when I decided, well, especially after I wrote a short essay for a literature class, a composition class. In it, I described watching a bobcat play with a piece of rawhide along the river when I was a child.
Yeah.
And the teacher said, an interesting story. And so that, it was a simple comment, but it was encouraging me to keep following it. But life sometimes gets in the way, and pursuing a career, I was a teacher and started raising a family. But the thought never went away. Mm-hmm. The thought that was there, that the stories had to be a part of my life because they were such an important part of my life as a child.
Yeah.
I wanted them to continue to be. So then at a certain point I sat down and started writing.
Right. And you love the stories, and the passion is there to hear them, so that comes out with what you do, and that's the important part. Right. And I agree that the story, I can't remember how you said it exactly, but I think you said the story is what's important, not so much the teller.
Right. The story is what has to go on.
But if the teller can't tell the story well, you're done, right? You're going to lose. You're not going to have your audience.
There has to be a certain amount of ability.
Absolutely. Right. And I think it is a crime. That's a literal crime, but it's a shame that that oral storytelling tradition doesn't exist in the way that it used to, because I mean, it would have had to have come naturally for your ancestors, and probably mine too in their own way. But but I tend to think of it in the Lakota context right now. If you're in a teepee for an entire winter on the plains near Rosebud, you got a lot of time to tell some stories and share some things.
Yeah, wintertime was storytelling time.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, for sure. You end the lesson with a simple story about the blind arrow maker. Mm-hmm. Can you share that story with the audience?
Well, in the old days, people had to be skilled enough to make everything that we needed, be it a robe, be it a piece of clothing, moccasins, tools, utensils, whatever. We had to make them. We couldn't go and buy them at a big box department store.
Exactly, yeah.
So everything had to be crafted, and everybody was taught how to do those things. Boys were taught, girls were taught, and by adults, and how to make those things that we needed in life. And that was especially true of a man who had to be a hunter, the provider, and protector, the warrior. Mm-hmm. He had to make his own weapons and tools. Mm-hmm. Every individual. So everybody made bows, everybody made arrows, everybody knew how to make shields and lances and war clubs and all those kind of things. knives, everything that we used, we all had to learn. But some people, understandably, could do something better than others.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody could make a bow better than others. So people went to that person to say, make a bow for me, and I'll give you a horse, and that kind of thing. There was a man who was very good at making arrows, but eventually he became blind. So he faced a moment in his life where it could have ended there.
Mm-hmm.
But he decided he was going to continue to make arrows because to him that was a simpler thing. So even after he was blind, he could feel things. Over time, he developed, he had even a more intricate level of skill in making arrows after he was blind because he relied totally on the sense of touch to do that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he had to have somebody chip the arrowheads for him and split the feathers. But once that was done, then once the materials were at hand and he could access them, then he knew what to do because, you know, the skill that came from the sight transferred to his sense of touch.
Yeah.
And he made very exquisite arrows,
Mm-hmm.
even better than he did when he was sighted.
Okay, yeah.
So, you know, life can guide us to one purpose.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes it makes a turn and guides us to another purpose in another way.
Yeah.
And to me, that's the lesson of the blind arrow maker.
Right. You might lose your purpose, but you find it in a different way.
Find it a different way.
And life seems to have a way of knocking us off the road that, you know, that old line about make plans and watch God laugh and that type of thing. So,
right.
And it strikes me as you say that too, that you said some people had the talent of making those things and some people had talent in other. So everyone had their purpose. Tribal purpose.
Right.
You know, you do things in a certain way for your tribe, and it worked that way.
Yeah, exactly.
It's the way it's supposed to work.
Right.
Excellent. Good stuff again, Joseph.
Great.
And I appreciate having you here for the conversation.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. And we thank our audience for joining us here at Ho-Chokeh at the center of St. Joseph's Indian School campus, where we talk about issues central to Native American education today. Until next time, stay centered.